What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom, especially when even the law itself was shaped by men who believed piracy was unnatural in a woman? History's cold response: almost none. The 17th and 18th centuries, during what is now known as the Golden Age of Piracy, were marked by an intense and often brutal maritime world. Female pirates, though rare, were seen as doubly transgressive by the authorities of the time. They had violated both the law of the empire and the gender norms deeply embedded in the social fabric. When women were captured, their chances of mercy were slim. The British Admiralty courts, in particular, showed little tolerance for piracy. These courts, often operating in makeshift tribunals across colonies like Jamaica or New Providence, were known for swift, predetermined verdicts. These courts operated without juries, meaning the process was hardly impartial. The legal system was designed to ensure swift justice, but it was also one marked by theatrical displays of punishment. Testimonies came from ship captains, naval officers and sailors, many of whom feared being implicated in piracy themselves. The accused, especially women, had little chance of a fair trial. One of the most infamous cases was that of Bonny and Mary Red, two of the most notorious female pirates in history. Their trial in 1720 in Spanish Town, Jamaica, highlighted how women were treated in the context of piracy. When Bonny was condemned to death, her retort to her lover, Calico Jack, was bitter. "If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." This remark, recorded in the court transcript, reflected her defiance, but also her awareness of the unequal treatment women pirates received. The two women were sentenced to death, but their legal defense was pregnancy, the infamous plea known as pleading the belly. It was one of the few protections women had in this era of brutal justice. In Bonny and Reed's case, it worked, temporarily. They were granted a stay of execution, but most women who found themselves in a similar situation were not so lucky. The fates of female pirates were often sealed before they ever spoke in their defense. The overwhelming power of patriarchal law, compounded by the legal and social biases of the time, left little room for hope. But what did this justice look like? The executions of female pirates were as brutal and public as those of their male counterparts. The British Admiralty had one particular place in mind for these executions: Execution Dock in Wapping, London. Here, many pirates, both male and female, met their end. As the tide of the Thames rolled silently beneath, the screams of the condemned were the only sound to pierce the calm of the morning. The bodies of pirates, regardless of gender, hung there as gruesome examples to anyone who dared challenge the British Empire. Under British maritime law, piracy was a capital crime. The Piracy Act of 1698, passed under King William III, made it clear that anyone guilty of piracy would suffer pains of death. And so, under the shadow of the gallows, female pirates like their male counterparts were sentenced to death. However, the methods of execution were crueler than those seen on land. Pirates were not given a long fall to their death, but instead suffered prolonged strangulation as they were dropped just a short distance from the platform. This method, known as the Marshal's Dance, ensured that the condemned would convulse before ultimately dying. The public execution of female pirates was meant to send a clear message: piracy would not be tolerated. Though these executions were rarer for women, the public spectacle was no less brutal. Mary Critchett, an American woman who had joined a crew of pirates in 1729, met the same fate. She was captured near Virginia and tried in Williamsburg, where she was found guilty of piracy and swiftly hanged. There were no pleas of pregnancy to save her. For her, and countless others like her, death came swiftly and without fanfare. But execution was not the only punishment female pirates faced. Flogging was another punishment meted out before the final sentence was passed. The cat-o'-nine tails, a whip capable of tearing flesh with every strike, was commonly used by naval authorities and colonial governors to publicly humiliate pirates. Flogging could range from a dozen lashes to over 100. depending on the severity of the crime. Public flogging served two purposes: to punish and to deter. The crowds, often made up of townspeople, including women and children, were meant to witness the spectacle and learn a lesson about the consequences of piracy. For female pirates, their punishment was a gendered spectacle, often seen as a further humiliation as their bodies became the objects of public display. Bonny and Mary Red, after their capture by Jamaican authorities, were reportedly kept in deplorable conditions and subjected to harsh treatment even before their trial. Though there's no direct record of flogging in their case, it's likely that they endured some form of public humiliation during their imprisonment. Female pirates in other colonies, such as those captured off the coast of the American colonies or the West Indies, were routinely flogged as part of their sentencing or to force confessions. Flogging was not just a punishment. It was a tool of control. Women who dared to defy the maritime world, taking on roles traditionally reserved for men, were subjected to public displays of degradation. These women were stripped of their dignity and reduced to mere examples for the public to learn from. In some cases, female pirates didn't face death or the lash. Instead, they were forced into lives of concubinage or slavery. While specific evidence of this fate for female pirates is limited, agree that women captured in piracy, especially those of African or indigenous descent, were often sold into forced labor. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where piracy and privateering blurred into the economy of slavery, women aboard pirate ships were frequently enslaved and integrated into plantation economies. Female pirates, though often caught in the gendered violence of the system, were not always afforded the same protections or rights as their male counterparts. Many women were erased from history, not through execution, but through silence. They were captured, sold, and forced into lives of servitude. History has largely overlooked these women, focusing instead on their male counterparts, leaving these women's stories in the shadows of history. For many, capture did not lead to a swift execution, but to a quiet erasure, their names fading from the records, lost in the fog of time. But not all women pirates faced the gallows or slavery. Some were condemned to spend their final days aboard prison ships, decommissioned warships that had been turned into floating jails. These prison ships were anchored off colonial coasts or British harbors, where prisoners, including women, were kept in horrendous conditions. The prisoners were shackled below deck, in dark, cramped, and unventilated spaces. Disease spread quickly, and food was scarce. For female pirates, the suffering was doubly harsh. Many endured exploitation and abuse while confined to these ships, but these fates were rarely recorded. The prison ships were not places of justice, but of abandonment. The women confined there were often ignored by the legal system. Their deaths, not swift or public, went largely unnoticed by history. But this absence in the records speaks volumes. The erasure of female pirates from history reflects the deeper issues of gendered power and control in maritime law. Their stories, often lost to time, serve as a stark reminder of the lengths to which the empire would go to maintain control. The punishments faced by female pirates were not just about justice. They were about power, about control, about the fear of women who defied the gender norms of their time. These women, though few in number, made their mark on history, not as criminals, but as rebels, challenging the maritime world's expectations of women. Their punishment was not just physical, but psychological, as they were erased from the narrative, silenced by an empire that feared their power. What does the erasure of female pirates say about justice, power, and history? As Tacitus once said, "The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws." These women were erased not by accident, but by design. Their fate was not simply a product of their crime, but of a world that feared their defiance. History remembers those in power. But what does it mean when the powerless are forgotten?